The afternoon sun beat down on Naval Air Station Lemoore with the kind of heat that made asphalt shimmer like water. Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reed stood in the hangar bay, watching a crew of young aviation mechanics work on an Fi-18 Super Hornet. At 58, Daniel was in his final year of service, counting down the months until retirement. His hands, scarred from decades of working on aircraft, rested on his hips as he observed the organized chaos of the flight line. "Master Chief, you got a minute?" A voice called from behind him. Daniel turned to see Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh approaching, a manila folder tucked under her arm. She was the new executive officer of the maintenance squadron, sharp and efficient, barely 35 years old. Her arrival 3 months ago had brought changes, most of them good, some of them uncomfortable. "Always got time for the XO," Daniel replied, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who had seen 3 decades of naval aviation. Sarah stopped a few feet away, her expression unreadable. "I've been going through the old storage records. There's a lockbox in the archives with your name on it. Been there since 1993. Nobody seems to know what's in it." Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. 1993. He knew exactly what was in that box. "It's personal effects," he said quietly. "Nothing official." "I figured," Sarah said, her tone softening. "But regulations say personal storage gets cleared out after 30 years unless there's a valid reason. That deadline passed last month. I need you to either claim it or dispose of it." Daniel looked past her, out toward the flight line where heat waves distorted the rows of aircraft. He had buried that box in the archives deliberately, hoping he would never have to open it again. Inside were letters, photographs, and a small journal, all belonging to his best friend, Lieutenant Michael Torres, who had died in a training accident 32 years ago. "I'll take care of it," Daniel said. Sarah nodded and handed him the folder. "The access form is in there. Just sign it and bring it to the archives. No rush, but don't let it sit too long." She walked away, leaving Daniel alone with the folder and the memories it had just unearthed. He opened it and saw the faded label, "Personal Effects, LCDR Michael Torres, deceased." Michael had been more than a friend. He had been Daniel's mentor, his brother, the man who had convinced him to stay in the Navy when Daniel was ready to quit after his first difficult deployment. Michael had been fearless, brilliant, and deeply loved by everyone who served with him, and Daniel had never forgiven himself for what happened. The accident occurred during a routine training flight. Michael was piloting an F-14 Tomcat when a mechanical failure caused the aircraft to lose control. He ejected, but the ejection seat malfunctioned. He died on impact with the ocean. The investigation concluded it was a tragic equipment failure. No one was at fault. But Daniel knew better. He'd been the lead maintenance inspector on that aircraft. He had signed off on the ejection system just 3 days before the crash. He had followed every procedure, checked every component, done everything by the book. But something had gone wrong, and Michael had paid the price. For 32 years, Daniel had carried that weight. He had thrown himself into his work, becoming one of the most respected master chiefs in the fleet. He had mentored hundreds of young sailors, ensured thousands of aircraft were safe to fly. But no amount of perfection could erase the one mistake he could never prove or disprove. The lockbox contained Michael's final letters to his wife, his young daughter, and a journal where he had written about his dreams for the future. Daniel had promised Michael's widow, Elena, that he would keep the items safe until she was ready to receive them. But Elena had never asked for them. She had moved on, remarried, built a new life. Daniel had kept the box hidden, unable to deliver it and unable to let it go. Now, 32 years later, the past was demanding his attention. Daniel folded the access form and slipped it into his pocket. He would go to the archives tomorrow. He would open the box, And maybe, after all these years, he would finally find the courage to face the truth he had been running from, because buried inside that lockbox was not just Michael's legacy, it was Daniel's unfinished confession. Part 2. The Sealed Envelope. The Archives building sat at the far edge of the Naval Air Station, a squat concrete structure that looked more like a bunker than an office. Daniel arrived early the next morning, before the heat of the day could settle in. The hallways inside were narrow and dimly lit, lined with metal shelves holding decades of forgotten paperwork, maintenance logs, and personnel records. The archives clerk, a young petty officer 3rd class named Emma Rodriguez, looked up from her computer as Daniel entered. She had the tired eyes of someone working the early shift and the cautious politeness of a junior sailor addressing a Master Chief. "Morning, Master Chief," she said. "You here for the lockbox?" "That's right," Daniel replied, handing her the signed access form. Emma scanned the document, then stood and motioned for him to follow. They walked deeper into the archives, past rows of filing cabinets and stacks of cardboard boxes. The air smelled of old paper and dust. Finally, they stopped in front of a storage cage secured with a heavy padlock. Emma unlocked the cage and stepped inside. She returned a moment later, carrying a gray metal lockbox, no bigger than a shoebox, with a combination lock on the front. The label on top read, "Torres, Michael A., Personal Effects." "Here you go," Emma said, setting the box on a nearby table. "You need me to witness the opening?" "No," Daniel said quickly. "I've got it from here." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Let me know if you need anything." She returned to her desk, leaving Daniel alone with the box. Daniel stared at it for a long moment. His hands, steady when working on million-dollar aircraft, trembled slightly as he reached for the combination lock. He remembered the code Michael's birthday. He twisted the dials, and the lock clicked open. Inside, the contents were exactly as he remembered. A stack of letters bound with a rubber band, a small leather journal with a worn cover, and a handful of photographs. On top of everything was a sealed envelope with Daniel's name written on the front in Michael's handwriting. Daniel's breath caught. He had forgotten about that envelope. He picked it up carefully, as if it might disintegrate in his hands. The seal was still intact, yellowed with age but unbroken. Michael must have placed it in the box just before his final flight, intending for Daniel to find it someday. For a long time, Daniel just held the envelope. He could walk away. He could reseal the box, return it to the archives, and let it sit for another 30 years. No one would blame him, but the weight of 3 decades pressed down on him. He had avoided this moment for too long. He slid his finger under the flap and carefully tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. Daniel unfolded it and began to read. "Danny, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm sitting across from you at the O Club right now, laughing about how paranoid I was. But just in case, I wanted to write this down. You're going to blame yourself. I know you. You're going to go over every inspection report, every checklist, every signature, looking for the mistake you think you made. Stop. You didn't do anything wrong. I've been flying long, enough to know that sometimes things just fail. Equipment breaks. Systems malfunction. It's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's just the risk we take every time we strap into the cockpit. But I need you to do something for me. Don't let this destroy you. Don't let guilt turn you into someone who's afraid to trust their own judgment. You're one of the best maintainers I've ever worked with, and the fleet needs people like you. Take care of Elena and Sophie. Make sure they know I love them more than anything. And take care of yourself, too. You're a good man, Danny. Don't forget that. See you on the other side, brother. Mike. Daniel's vision blurred as tears spilled down his cheeks. He lowered the letter, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For 32 years, he had carried the belief that he had failed Michael. He had replayed every moment of that inspection, searching for the flaw, the oversight, the mistake that had cost his friend his life. But Michael had known. He had known Daniel would blame himself, and he had written this letter to stop him. Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. He wiped his eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. The weight he had carried for so long didn't disappear. It would never fully disappear, but it shifted. The crushing guilt gave way to something softer. Grief, yes, but also gratitude that Michael had forgiven him before there was even anything to forgive. Daniel looked at the rest of the contents in the lockbox. The letters for Elena and Sophie were still there, waiting to be delivered. He had put it off for too long, telling himself it wasn't the right time. But there was no right time. There was only now. He closed the lockbox and picked it up. It was time to finish what he should have done 32 years ago. Part 3. The unwelcome return. Daniel didn't go to Elena's house right away. Instead, he spent the next 2 days preparing himself. He read through Michael's journal, page by page, absorbing the words of a man he had known so well, yet never fully understood. The journal was filled with reflections on fatherhood, marriage, and the strange beauty of flying at the edge of the sky. Michael had been thoughtful, introspective, and deeply aware of his own mortality. On the third day, Daniel drove to the address he had found through a quiet inquiry with the base personnel office. Elena Torres had remarried and now went by Elena Caldwell. She lived in a quiet neighborhood about 45 minutes from the base, in a modest 2-story house with a neatly trimmed lawn and a swing set in the backyard. Daniel parked across the street and sat in his truck for a long time, staring at the house. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times, but now that he was here, the words felt hollow and insufficient. Finally, he forced himself to get out. He walked up the driveway, the lockbox tucked under his arm, and rang the doorbell. A woman answered. She was in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind, tired eyes. Daniel recognized her immediately, though she had aged just as he had. "Elena," he said quietly. Her expression shifted from polite curiosity to shock. "Daniel? Daniel Reed?" "Yeah, it's me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elena's face hardened. "What are you doing here?" Daniel had expected this. "I need to talk to you. It's about Michael." Elena's jaw tightened. "That was 32 years ago, Daniel. I don't want to go back there." "I know," Daniel said. "But there's something you need to see. Something he left for you." Elena stared at him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she stepped aside. 5 minutes. Daniel followed her into the house. The interior was warm and lived in, with family photos lining the walls. He saw pictures of Elena with a man he assumed was her current husband, and a young woman who had to be Sophie Michael's daughter, now a grown woman with a family of her own. Elena led him to the kitchen table and gestured for him to sit. She remained standing, her arms crossed. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel set the lockbox on the table. "This belonged to Michael. It's been in the base archives for 32 years. I should have brought it to you a long time ago. I'm sorry." Elena stared at the box as if it were a live grenade. "What's inside?" "Letters. For you and Sophie. And a journal. He wrote it all before his last flight. He wanted you to have it." Elena's composure cracked. She pulled out a chair and sat down, her hand shaking as she reached for the box. "Why didn't you bring this to me before?" "Because I was a coward," Daniel said. "I blame myself for what happened. I couldn't face you." Elena opened the box and pulled out the stack of letters. She untied the rubber band with trembling fingers and opened the first one. Her eyes scanned the page, and tears began to stream down her face. Daniel looked away, giving her privacy. The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of Elena's quiet crying. After a long time, she spoke. He wrote to Sophie. He told her how much he loved her. He told her to be brave. He loved you both more than anything, Daniel said. That's what he told me. Elena looked up at him, her eyes red and puffy. You didn't kill him, Daniel. I know that's what you've been thinking all these years. But it wasn't your fault. Michael said the same thing, Daniel replied, his voice thick. He left me a letter, too. Elena reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Then believe him, and let it go. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in 32 years, he felt the chains around his heart begin to loosen. But as Elena returned to reading the letters, Daniel knew his work wasn't finished. There was still one more person who needed to know the truth. Sophie. Part 4. The daughter's question finding Sophie was easier than Daniel expected. Elena gave him her daughter's phone number and address without hesitation, though she warned him that Sophie might not be receptive. She's angry, Elena explained as Daniel prepared to leave. Not at you specifically, but at the Navy, at the whole system. She was only 6 when Michael died, and she grew up believing the military took her father away and gave us nothing in return. Daniel understood. He had seen that anger before in the families of fallen sailors who felt abandoned by the institution that had taken so much from them. Sophie lived in San Diego, not far from Naval Base Coronado. Daniel called her first, unsure if showing up unannounced would make things worse. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, cautious and guarded. Hello? Is this Sophie Caldwell? Daniel asked. Who's asking? My name is Daniel Reed. I served with your father, Michael Torres. I was his friend. There was a long pause. What do you want? I have something that belonged to him. Something he wanted you to have. I'd like to bring it to you if you're willing to meet. Another pause. Why now? It's been 32 years. Because I was too much of a coward to do it sooner, Daniel said honestly. And because I think you deserve to know the truth about who your father was. Sophie was silent for so long that Daniel thought she had hung up. Then she spoke, her voice tight. Fine. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. I'll text you the address. The line went dead. The next afternoon, Daniel drove to Sophie's apartment, a modest complex near the waterfront. She met him at the door, a woman in her late 30s with her father's dark eyes and her mother's strong features. She didn't invite him in. Instead, she stepped outside and crossed her arms. You said you have something for me, she said. Daniel handed her the journal. Your father kept this. He wrote about you, about how much he loved you and your mother. I think he'd want you to read it. Sophie took the journal but didn't open it. My mom told me you blamed yourself for his death. I did, Daniel admitted. For a long time, and now? Now I know better. Your father wrote me a letter. He told me it wasn't my fault. I'm trying to believe him. Sophie looked down at the journal, her expression softening. I don't remember him very well. I have a few memories, him picking me up, reading to me before bed. But mostly, I just have the stories my mom told me. He was a good man, Daniel said. One of the best pilots I ever knew. And he loved you more than anything. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Then why did he leave? The question hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. He didn't leave. He was taken. And it wasn't fair. And it wasn't right. But it wasn't because he didn't love you. Sophie wiped her eyes. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. You have every right to be angry, Daniel said. But don't be angry at him. He didn't choose to leave you. Sophie nodded slowly. She opened the journal and flipped through the pages. Her eyes caught on a passage, and she read it aloud. Sophie turned 3 today. I can't believe how fast she's growing. She's smart, curious, and fearless. I hope she stays that way. I hope she knows that no matter where I am, I'm always thinking about her." Sophie's voice cracked, and she closed the journal. "Thank you for bringing this to me." "There's more," Daniel said. "Letters. For you and your mother. They're with Elena now, but if you want copies, I can arrange that." Sophie nodded, clutching the journal to her chest. "I think I'd like that." As Daniel turned to leave, Sophie called after him. "Master Chief?" He stopped. "You didn't fail him," she said. "My mom told me what happened. It was an equipment failure. You did everything right." Daniel's throat tightened. "Thank you." "No," Sophie said. "Thank you for remembering him." Daniel walked back to his truck, feeling lighter than he had in decades. But as he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still one more piece of the story left to uncover, and it was buried somewhere in the records of that fateful day. Part 5. The Hidden Report. Daniel returned to Naval Air Station Lemoore with a renewed sense of purpose. He had delivered the letters, faced the families, and begun to let go of the guilt that had defined him for so long. But something still gnawed at him, a nagging feeling that there was more to Michael's death than he had been told. He went back to the archives, this time requesting access to the official accident investigation report from 1993. Petty Officer Rodriguez seemed surprised to see him again so soon, but didn't ask questions. She pulled the file from a locked cabinet and handed it to him. Daniel sat down at one of the old wooden tables and opened the thick folder. The report was exhaustive, filled with technical diagrams, witness statements, and maintenance logs. He had read it once before, years ago, but this time he went through it line by line, looking for anything he might have missed. The investigation had concluded that the ejection seat malfunction was caused by a faulty explosive cartridge, a critical component that was supposed to propel the seat clear of the aircraft. The cartridge had failed to ignite properly, causing a delayed and incomplete ejection. Daniel flipped to the section on maintenance records. His signature was there, along with those of 3 other inspectors. Everything had been done according to procedure. The cartridges had been tested and certified. There was no evidence of negligence or oversight. But then Daniel noticed something strange. Tucked into the back of the file was a supplemental report, dated 6 months after the accident. It was written by a civilian contractor who had been brought in to conduct an independent review of the ejection seat components. The report was brief, only 3 pages long, but its conclusion was damning. The explosive cartridges used in the F-14 ejection seats during this period were part of a defective batch manufactured by a subcontractor. The defect was not detectable through standard inspection procedures. The manufacturer has since issued a recall and replaced all affected units. Daniel's hands shook as he read the words. The cartridges were defective. There was nothing he could have done to detect the problem. The fault lay with the manufacturer, not with him or anyone on his team. He flipped back to the main report, searching for any reference to this finding. There was nothing. The supplemental report had been filed separately, and it appeared that no one had ever bothered to inform the families or the maintenance crew. Daniel felt a surge of anger. For 32 years, he had carried the weight of Michael's death, believing he had missed something, that he had failed in his duty. And all along, the Navy had known the truth but never bothered to tell him. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Petty Officer Rodriguez looked up, startled. "Master Chief? Is everything okay?" "No," Daniel said. "It's not." He left the archives and went straight to Lieutenant Commander Walsh's office. She was at her desk, reviewing personnel files, and looked up in surprise when Daniel walked in without knocking. "Master Chief? What's going on?" Daniel placed the supplemental report on her desk. "Read this." Sarah picked it up, her brow furrowing as she scanned the pages. When she finished, she looked up at him, her expression grave. "This changes everything," she said. "Damn right it does," Daniel said. "I've been carrying the guilt for Michael Torres's death for 32 years. And the whole time, the Navy knew it wasn't my fault. They knew the cartridges were defective, and they buried the report." Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing the information. "Do Elena and Sophie know about this?" "No, and they should." "Agreed," Sarah said. "But before we go to them, we need to figure out why this report was buried in the first place." Daniel crossed his arms. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking someone didn't want this to become public." "A defective batch of ejection seat cartridges? That's a huge liability. If the families had known, they could have sued the manufacturer or the Navy." "So they covered it up," Daniel said, his voice cold. "Maybe, or maybe it just got lost in the bureaucracy. Either way, it's not right." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the flight line. "We need to take this higher. I'll talk to the Commodore. They'll want to know about this. And Elena and Sophie?" Daniel asked. "I'll make sure they get the full story," Sarah promised. "They deserve to know the truth." Daniel nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anger. The truth had finally come to light, but it had taken 3 decades and a chance discovery to uncover it. As he left Sarah's office, he thought about Michael's letter. "Don't let this destroy you," Michael had written. "Don't let guilt turn you into someone who's afraid to trust their own judgment." For the first time in 32 years, Daniel felt like he could honor that request. The guilt wasn't gone entirely, but it had transformed into something else, a quiet determination to make sure the truth was never buried again. Part 6. The Reckoning. The next morning, Daniel was summoned to the office of Captain Thomas Bradley, the Commodore of the Naval Air Station. The Commodore was a stern, no-nonsense officer with 35 years of service and a reputation for fairness. Daniel had only spoken to him a handful of times, and each conversation had been brief and professional. This time was different. When Daniel entered the office, he found not only the Commodore, but also Lieutenant Commander Walsh and a civilian lawyer from the Judge Advocate General's office. The atmosphere was tense, formal, and charged with an unspoken gravity. "Master Chief Reed," Captain Bradley said, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit down." Daniel sat, his posture rigid. He had spent enough years in the Navy to know, when a conversation was about to get serious, the Commodore folded his hands on his desk. "Commander Walsh brought me the supplemental report you found. I've reviewed it, along with the original investigation file. I want to hear your account of what happened 32 years ago in your own words." Daniel took a deep breath and began. He walked them through the days leading up to Michael's final flight, the inspections he had conducted, the procedures he had followed. He described the aftermath, the guilt, the second-guessing, the decades of self-blame. When he finished, the room was silent. The JAG lawyer spoke first. "Master Chief, based on the supplemental report and your testimony, it's clear that you and your team followed all required procedures. The defect in the cartridges was undetectable by standard inspection methods. You are not at fault." "I know that now," Daniel said quietly. "But I didn't know it for 32 years. And neither did the families." Captain Bradley's expression darkened. "That's what concerns me. This supplemental report was filed 6 months after the accident, but it was never distributed to the maintenance team or the families. Someone made a decision to bury it. Who?" Daniel asked. The Commodore shook his head. "That's what we're trying to determine. The report was signed by a contractor who is since retired. The officer who commissioned the independent review is deceased. We're combing through the records, but it's possible we'll never know exactly who made the call to keep this quiet." "That's not good enough," Daniel said, his voice sharper than he intended. Elena and Sophie deserve answers. They deserve to know that Michael's death wasn't anyone's fault. I agree, Captain Bradley said. And we're going to make that right? He slid a document across the desk. This is a formal acknowledgement of the findings in the supplemental report. It states that Lieutenant Michael Torres's death was the result of a manufacturing defect, not maintenance oversight. It also includes a recommendation for the Navy to issue a formal apology to the family and to review its procedures for communicating accident investigation. Findings. Daniel picked up the document and read it carefully. It was everything he had wanted to hear for 32 years, but seeing it in writing felt surreal. When will this go to the family? He asked. As soon as you're ready to deliver it, the Commodore said. I think it would mean more coming from you than from a stranger. Daniel nodded. I'll take it to them. Captain Bradley stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Master Chief, I want you to know that the Navy failed you. We failed Lieutenant Torres's family. That's not something we can undo, but we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Thank you, sir, Daniel said, rising to his feet as he left the office. Lieutenant Commander Walsh walked beside him. You did the right thing, pushing for this, she said. A lot of people would have just let it go. I couldn't, Daniel said. Not after reading Michael's letter. Sarah smiled. He sounds like he was a good man. The best, Daniel replied. That evening, Daniel called Elena and asked if he could come by. She agreed, and this time when he arrived, she invited him in without hesitation. They sat in her living room, and Daniel handed her the document from the Commodore. Elena read it slowly, her hands trembling. When she finished, she set it down on the coffee table and covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. I'm sorry, Daniel said. I know this doesn't change what happened, but I thought you should know. Elena wiped her eyes and looked at him. It does change something. For 32 years, I wondered if someone had made a mistake. If Michael's death could have been prevented. Now I know it couldn't have been. That brings me peace. I'm glad, Daniel said. Elena reached over and squeezed his hand. Thank you, Daniel. For everything? As Daniel drove home that night, he felt a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. The truth had finally come to light, and the weight he had carried for so long was gone. But there was still one more thing he needed to do. Part 7. The final letter. Daniel returned to his small house on the edge of town. A modest ranch-style home he had bought after his divorce years ago. It was quiet, functional, and filled with the echoes of a life spent mostly alone. He poured himself a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and pulled out a pad of paper. He had never been good with words. His entire career had been built on precision, procedure, and action. But tonight, he needed to write. Not for anyone else, for himself. He picked up a pen and began. Michael, it's been 32 years since you left. I spent most of that time blaming myself, convinced that I missed something, that I failed you. But I found your letter. I found the supplemental report. I know now that there was nothing I could have done. You were right. I let the guilt destroy parts of me. I became afraid to trust my own judgment. I pushed people away. I stopped believing I deserved to move forward. But I'm trying to change that now. I brought your letters to Elena and Sophie. I made sure they know the truth. And I'm learning to forgive myself. The way you forgave me before there was even anything to forgive. I'm retiring in a few months. I don't know what comes next, but for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of it. I think I'm ready to stop running from the past and start living in the present. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I'll carry your memory with me, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what it means to be a good man. See you on the other side. Brother. Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. He didn't know what he would do with it, Maybe he would leave it at Michael's grave. Or maybe he would keep it as a private testament to the friendship that had shaped his life. Either way, it felt like the final step in a journey that had lasted 3 decades. The next morning, Daniel returned to Naval Air Station Lemoore for what would be one of his last days of active duty. He walked through the hangar bay, watching the young sailors work with the same focus and dedication he had once brought to the job. He stopped to talk with a few of them, offering advice and encouragement as he stood on the flight line. Watching an FA-18 take off into the morning sky, he felt a presence beside him. It was Lieutenant Commander Walsh. "You seem lighter," she observed. "I am," Daniel said. "For the first time in a long time." "Good," Sarah said. "You deserve that." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the aircraft climb higher and higher until it disappeared into the blue. "What are you going to do when you retire?" Sarah asked. Daniel smiled. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out." "Well, whatever you do, I hope you find peace." "I think I already have," Daniel said as he walked away from the flight line. He thought about Michael's letter, about Elena and Sophie, about the years of guilt he had finally let go. The earthquake that had shaken his world hadn't been a natural disaster, it had been the truth, finally breaking through the layers of secrecy and silence. And in its aftermath, he had found not just closure, but redemption. Part 8. The long road home. Daniel's retirement ceremony was a quiet affair. He had requested no fanfare, no speeches, no crowds. Just a simple flag presentation in the hangar bay, attended by a handful of colleagues and friends. Lieutenant Commander Walsh was there, along with Captain Bradley and a few of the young sailors Daniel had mentored over the years. As the flag was folded and handed to him, Daniel felt the weight of 3 decades of service settle into his hands. It was over. His time in the Navy had come to an end. But unlike the fear and uncertainty he had expected to feel, there was only peace. After the ceremony, Daniel drove to the National Cemetery in Riverside, where Michael Torres was buried. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rows of white headstones. Daniel walked slowly through the grounds until he found the one he was looking for. Lieutenant Michael Torres, United States. Maybe 1969 to 1993, beloved husband and father Daniel knelt down and placed a hand on the cool marble. For a long time, he didn't speak. He just sat there, feeling the weight of the years, the grief, and the gratitude all mixed together. Finally, he pulled out the letter he had written and set it on the ground beside the headstone. He didn't read it aloud. He didn't need to. Michael would understand. "I'm sorry it took me so long," Daniel said quietly. "But I got there. I made sure Elena and Sophie know the truth. I made sure they know how much you loved them." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm going to be okay now. I'm going to stop carrying the weight. I'm going to live the way you would have wanted me to." A breeze stirred the air, rustling the leaves of the nearby oak trees. Daniel stood up, brushing the dirt from his knees. He looked at the headstone one last time, then turned and walked back toward his truck. As he drove away from the cemetery, he felt lighter than he had in years. The past was finally at rest, and the future stretched out before him like an open road. He thought about Sophie and her family, about Elena and her quiet strength, about the young sailors he had mentored who would carry on the work he had started. He thought about the letter Michael had left him, the words that had set him free. "Don't let this destroy you." For 32 years, he'd been destroyed. But now, he was whole again. Daniel drove into the fading light, the California sun sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He didn't know where he was going yet. He didn't have a plan. But for the first time in a long time, that was okay, because he had time. He had life. And he had the courage to face whatever came next. As the miles passed beneath his tires, Daniel thought about the earthquake that had started it all, not the literal shaking of the earth, but the tremor of truth that had finally broken through the surface. It had cracked open the past, unearthed the secrets, and forced him to confront the guilt he had buried for so long. And in doing so, it had set him free. Daniel Reed, Master Chief Petty Officer, retired, drove into the night with the flag of his country folded on the seat beside him, and the memory of his best friend guiding him home. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready, and that was enough. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not healed by time, but by the courage to face the truth and the grace to forgive ourselves. Daniel's journey reminds us that honor is not about being perfect. It's about doing the right thing, even when it takes 32 years. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Another powerful story of redemption is waiting for you on your screen. Click now to continue the journey.